All right, let's think about destiny and freedom and then duty, the duty of people. So this is, now my book, as you know, is not really keyed to yours, but I have it on page 37. But it's in end of lesson number 2, end of lesson 2. And he tells us the duty, our primary duty, is to do what? Get wisdom. Whatever you do, get wisdom. What is the beginning of wisdom? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So if we're going to get wisdom, we have to learn, first of all, God. So what let me think about when we think about the Bible. One of the things that we need to recognize is this, that the Bible is nothing less than God says, this is who I am. God's introducing himself to us, and here is my character, here's my nature, and here is what I'm about. So if we're going to learn wisdom, we have to learn God. That means we're going to have to turn our attention to the book of God. The Bible is nothing less than God's explanation of himself as he moves in the affairs of men and his eternity. So that's what the Bible really is, if we could put it in a nutshell. So here I am, and here's what we need to learn. So if we're going to learn wisdom, we have to learn God. We have to learn about God. And so the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So notice this also before we move on. That is really a disposition, isn't it? The fear of the Lord, isn't that a disposition? It's a disposition. What does that disposition entail? Okay, respect for God. What does the fear of the Lord entail? What all does it entail? What do you think, Karen? Obedience. Let's just lump all that together in this, and that is a frame of mind that wants to learn God and be compatible to God. It's a frame of mind. Wisdom is a frame of mind. It is not something that you're just going to learn from books per se, but it's a frame of mind. It has to do with a disposition with which I approach all knowledge. That is wisdom. And that's why so many people can be brilliant, smart, but they have not wisdom because they have not the frame of mind that is disposed to it. So we have many people in the world, absolutely brilliant people, many mathematicians and scientists, philosophers, who have thought deeply about many issues, but if you don't begin with a disposition, a humble disposition to learn God, then you're cutting out wisdom. That's the problem right now as we see in America. So that's what wisdom is. So we have to, our duty then is to get wisdom. So let's notice, this is, as I said, on page 37, but a subtitle is duty. What is our duty? So here's something interesting. Walter Porter, the author of the book, brings out the fact that God created the heavens and the earth, did it in 6 days, Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. On the seventh day he rested, but he created it with order. He brought out of chaos order, and everything is so precise in that order that we can learn from that order. We can learn, and that's what Solomon invites us to do, to learn from nature the order of the universe and are able to discern things. So that's, for example, that's exactly what Isaac Newton was all about. Isaac Newton, what do we know Isaac Newton for? For what do we know him about? And the apple. Okay, what did you say, Jim? Gravity, right, the apple. Okay, that would be the gravity. But you know what? Isaac Newton was more of a theologian than he was a scientist. He wrote more about theology than he did about science. That is to say, he commented on the books of the Bible. I don't know if you remember that the series I had on Revelation, but he took the early date on Revelation, but he gave multiple reasons why that was the case. And he went through the Revelation, he went through many different books of the Bible, and he was more of a theologian than he was a scientist, but really, we think of him as a scientist, and we know of him as gravity, but he began with a disposition. So as he learned about the heavens and the universe, then he was more and more driven to understand that there was a creative mind behind it all. But that was because he had a disposition for wisdom. So there's order in the universe, and when we see the order, then we are able to learn from that. And that's what we have in Genesis chapter 1. So let's notice a couple of passages in Genesis chapter 1. This is the first one is chapter 2, but we'll start at 1:27 and 28. 1:27 and 28. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that creeps upon the earth. God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed which is on the face of the earth. Verse 30, to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heaven, to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything he had made. Behold, it was good. And there was evening and morning the sixth day. So notice what man is to be regarding his relationship to the creation. What is man to be in relationship to the creation? Verses 28 and 29. He's the head. That's right. There's a pyramid here, and man's the head of it. Now, okay, what does that imply? We're saying, okay, another Genesis story. What does that imply? We're stewards. We're to use the earth. And the resources are here for you to use, and we're to exercise dominion over those things. This is exactly where the world does not even start believing. They don't even want to believe that. They say that we're what? And we're a cancer on the earth. If you go to science class at MSU, you're going to find out you're a cancer on the earth. That's right. That's what scientists believe. Yeah, that's been doing that for a number of years. You're a cancer. The problem is man. That's the problem. Well, so, for example, Jacques Cousteau. Remember Jacques Cousteau, who's back in the day, famous oceanographer, said, you know what we need to do is we need to take thousands of people and exterminate them every day because we're the problem. The problem is us. There have been leaders of different organizations in government who said exactly the same thing. One of them even wrote a prayer to the crocodiles. You heard about this, the prayer to the crocodiles? He said, okay, and this is the head of the National Forest Service at one point, said, prayer to the crocodiles, and I hope that you'll get a mouthful of man every once in a while. But because they are thinking that you're the problem. The problem is man. So they have eliminated Genesis chapter 1, 28 and 29. So with that disposition, they don't even want to think about the order and the complexity of the universe at all. But that teaches us something, and Genesis begins showing us that we're to utilize the resources of the earth. So that's one area that we need to think about, and that is our duty to get wisdom, and that begins with what God has to say on the subject. Let's also notice this one. Bottom of this page, it's under duty. He points out that we are really not truly free. Now, Paul points it out in Romans chapter 6. So what does Paul say in Romans 6 that points out or shows that we are not truly, ultimately, in the end, free? We think about freedom, but we're not truly free. What does Paul say in Romans 6? Verses, I think, 17 and 18, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, you're either slaves to sin or you're a slave to God. You're a slave to sin or you're a slave to God, one of the two. So you were slaves of sin, but you became obedient from the heart to that form of teaching wherein you were delivered, and having been made free from sin, you became slaves of God. You're either a slave to sin or a slave to God. There's no alternative. That's how the Bible outlines it continually. So the question is, to what are we enslaved? So that's how the Bible shows us. So let's think about wisdom for a moment. There are passages in Proverbs that invite us to get wisdom. So let's look at Proverbs 1. Then we'll look at Proverbs chapter 8 and Proverbs chapter 9. This is one 20 through 23. Excuse me. Proverbs 1. If I can find it. Then 20 through 23. Solomon personifies wisdom as a woman crying in the streets and begs people to get wisdom. So someone pick up verses 20 through 23. All right, thank you for that read. Now, in this read, Solomon says there are three classes of people. And we've just noticed in Romans chapter 6, there are really only two classes. That is, you're slave to sin or slave to God, one of the two. But here he divides it into three classes of people. Did you notice that? The three classes. What are they? Verse 22. Simple ones, mockers, and those that hate knowledge. All right, all of these, of course, are speaking of those slaves to sin. But what is the difference between simple ones, scoffers, and fools? What's the difference here? Number one, simple ones, that is, those who are open to everything and open to every suggestion, and they have, so sometimes an open mind is not good. Open mind is good if you're thinking about trying to find truth, but sometimes our minds are so open that they're going to take in, and he warns us, you better be careful what you take in. You only have so much time. You only have so much ability to do certain things. You better be careful of what you ingest. What do you ingest? So simple ones are those who just, they take in everything and they don't really discern what is good and what's not. How about the scoffer? And I think your translation said mockers, didn't he? Mockers. Mockers is, and they mock, what do they mock? Yeah, people who are good, they mock God, they mock. Okay, so now we're even advancing further. Okay, they're taking all this material in, they're not discerning between good and bad, right and wrong, wisdom and folly. No discernment there. Now, some of them are mockers. That is, they simply mock the good. They mock good people, they mock God. And then we have, finally, the last one would be what? Knowledge haters. No, they hate knowledge. They hate knowledge. They hate the truth that comes. So he just shows you, I think that maybe gives you a good devolvement going down, on the evolutionary scale, going downward of just being open to everything and just not being discerning. Number two, mocking. And then now number three, you just hate. You hate the right. You hate. I just was about to ask that question. Do we have those three today? What do you think, Dan? Absolutely. Randy? Yeah, in the movies for years, you're right. In the movies for years, they have portrayed, such as, remember, Richard Chamberlain and the Thornbirds, they portray preachers and people, men of the cloth, so to speak, as big hypocrites. And that's what they portray them always. And that seems to be always the case. And they're, of course, the favorite ones to bash in movies. But that's the mocking. And that's, of course, created a lot of turmoil or people against religion in America. But they have majored in that. Very seldom do you find any preacher that is upheld or someone with integrity being upheld because of their integrity in the movies. Very, very seldom. Now, of course, there is today Angel Studios putting out a lot of good movies that have completely different take, and I think some of their material is really, really good. So, but be that as it may, that's how. Yeah. So if you're talking about the Mormons and multiple marriages, plurality of marriages, Jim Jones, all the cults, they're just religious people, and so you religious people fall into the same category. That's right. That's how they do it. Even just for example, on Fox News, I'm just frustrated. They want a representative of Islam, so they'll have an imam. A representative of the Jews, they have a rabbi, and a representative of Christianity, they'll have what? A Catholic priest. I thought, what in the world? I oppose the Catholics as much as I do the Muslims for the same reasons. Yeah, they are. Well, I found that out because on Ash Wednesday, most of the anchors were wearing ashes on the forehead. But be that as it may, the point is that's how people are categorized in this country. But it has been to the detriment of pure New Testament Christianity, really. So all of this to say, not to go too far afield here, but Proverbs says, all right, you better get wisdom. And here's how people are going to be in the disposition toward it. And so it might be the simple-minded ones who are just not going to be discerning, or the mockers, or the ones who hate knowledge. Unfortunately, too many of our own people fall into the first category, and that is the simple-minded. We just, we're not very discerning sometimes. We just take in everything and not making a very good judgment call on some of that. Let's look at another passage. This one be in Proverbs chapter 8, verses 1 through 5. All right, you have two of those categories that mentioned in chapter 1 right here, don't we? Simple ones and fools, once again. So the fools are those who are actually they mock wisdom. They mock God. They mock things that are religious. And that's what the word fool is about in the Old Testament as well as in the New. It's not about anything other than that. So let's go to one more passage, and this is chapter 9. This is chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. So that was Solomon's second invitation to find wisdom. So we had one in chapter 1, number 2 is in chapter 8, now number 3, chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. Good read. The next verse tells you if you're going to correct a scoffer, what's going to happen? One who is a mocker. Yes, sir. 7 pillars of wisdom. She has hewn her house in 7 pillars. I think that's just a figurative expression for that there's a woman here calling, and that woman is wisdom, and she has a house that is set on stable foundation. And that's the idea here. Not to say, okay, we've got to identify which pillar is which. But there are 7 pillars, and that is to say that she has a house, and she is inviting you to come into her house. It's a stable house with 7 pillars, and you're going to learn wisdom if you listen to her, Lady Wisdom. Kind of interesting how he does that. Really all through the book of Proverbs, he personifies wisdom as a woman, and she has a house. And here's what she wants you to do. She wants you to come in the house and learn from her. That's interesting, isn't it? He personifies it as a woman, isn't it? I say women are smiling in this room right now. That's right. There's a woman. And that's what he says, the lady wisdom. That's my understanding of it, Dan. Yeah, it's a perfect number. Yeah. And there's the passage in Proverbs also regarding 6 sins or deadly 7 are an abomination to him. And he's just kind of summarizing really the fullness of wickedness in that particular passage when he talks about 7 sins or abomination. I think that's Proverbs 6. But use 7 over and again, so it'd be the perfect number, just gives you an idea of perfect wisdom. I think that's correct. Yeah. Anything else on that? So, what are we to do? Our duty, this is what this is about. Our duty is to get wisdom. And to find wisdom, you're going to have to find it with God. And it begins with an attitude of your mind. And that's where this particular lesson or this particular chapter ends. And that is simply that we're going to have to get wisdom. We're going to have to do it that way. All right, let's turn attention, unless there's something else, to the next chapter, which is the sources and benefits of wisdom. Let me just move the screen here a second. The sources and benefits of wisdom. That's part access to wisdom. Yeah, access to wisdom, right. So we have access. There's 3 main headings here. Access to wisdom. What is the access that we have to wisdom? How do we access it? All right, number 2, wisdom, he's going to tell us, is in God's book. That's where we're going to find it primarily, in God's book, wisdom. This is why in America, we had in our educational system from the founding period until the turn of into the 20th century, the Bible was the basis, foundational cornerstone of all education, even those in secular schools. It was not simply religious schools, it was the foundation of all education. Our founding fathers recognized this to be the case. So if you're going to have wisdom, if you're going to learn, then you have to have a disposition of the mind, and so it began with God. It began with the Bible. Our children in the early America learned to read from the Bible, or they learned to read from McGuffey readers. Anybody seen McGuffey readers? Have you ever seen that, McGuffey readers? Yeah, you know what? When my children were young, I ordered McGuffey readers. I thought I didn't want them even in the public schools, but so I took them aside and I taught to read with the McGuffey readers. And so what it does is aligns everything with morals of the Bible. So you learn the alphabet with morals of the Bible. You learn the first grade reader, the second grade reader gives just moral stories, biblical ideas, concepts that are woven into everything in the McGuffey readers. And as you go through, then you learn the great literature in this, like even when you get up to the 6th grade, 7th grade readers, you learn about great literature, and it all is biblically oriented, or at least morally and God-centered orientation. That's what it was all about. And I thought, boy, this is, so I really mashed on that. So I'd say, hey, we're going to learn some more schooling. That was not always so popular, but with the kiddies, but that's how I did it. Matter of fact, I would say, all right, 5 in the morning, I get up, I said, now, I tried to get study done. And then at 6, I said, kids get up, because they had to go to school by 8. So I said, are you getting out of bed? Well, what? And I said, we're going to go to the table, and I would read Bible. I would just read Bible to them, and we'd talk about it. I talked about Bible lessons. They were like, I mean, they were little. I remember Megan, she was just a little bitty thing with a little pigtails. She said, Dad, I don't want to do this, but... But I just, no, you're going to learn. I said, you're not going to leave the house and say, Dad never taught me anything like that. So anyway, but my whole thing was, this is what education is about, and that's what it was in America. So in the 1940s, for example, in Dallas, Texas, they have a school book that has the teaching that they did on the Gospel of John, for example, I have in my library. Do you know it is more challenging, it is more difficult, more rigorous than Bible class material today in the Bible schools, in churches? It's more. It's like, wow. I go through it, I think, now let me try to answer this question. I don't know. I'm trying to think how this goes. And it would have the Gospel of John. It'll have maybe 2 pages on John chapter 1. This was in the Dallas public schools, and that's what they would teach. Today, of course, that is unheard of. If you even breathed about the Bible or made a picture of the cross in school, they're going to put you to juvenile detention practically. So, but that's the way education was, and that's why, in my estimation, we've changed so dramatically in America. But this is how wisdom is to be learned. So from nature, from our parents, from our Heavenly Father, we're to be selective. Then we're to learn it also from leaders. And here's an interesting thing. It involves hatred. Hatred, what? How does wisdom involve hatred? You have to have some hatred. What kind of hatred do you suppose it's about? Hate what is evil. You have to hate what is evil. How do you develop hatred? You develop hatred by loving what is good and recognizing what is good is successful in God-given wisdom. And in so doing, you're also learning to hate evil because you see what it does to people and does to countries and communities. You see what it does. And so when you see that from the Bible, then you learn to hate evil. That does not say that you hate the people, but you hate evil. So that's why when I preach, I talk about the horrific things that are taking place in our country. People will very quickly misapply it and misinterpret it to say, well, he doesn't like homosexuals. No, that has nothing to, it's not about the people. It's about the practices that are destructive to America. Same thing regarding witchcraft and sodomy and all those practices that are going on in America right now, such as, out here in Nevada, they have the Festival of the Burning Man. Have you heard of the Festival of the Burning Man? It's absolutely horrific, and they have thousands and thousands of people going to the Black Rock Desert in Nevada, and they build a great big image, an effigy, and they to the Mother Earth, and they burn incense to it, and they burn her, and then they go and have orgies and that kind of thing. It's paganism is what it is, paganism. But it's something that I just despise not the people. I despise the practices and the concepts that are behind it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, yeah. The desert floor was muck, and so they couldn't get out. Yeah, yeah. That was that last year, year before? You had a, yes, sir. Mom, you know what? I'm going to comment on that, and then I'm going to go back to what you mentioned about taking care of the earth and that kind of thing. So, you know, I had relatives in the family, and I'll just say this: I think they were so in tune with what's going on politically, and it made some of them a little bit dour and sour about the country. Now, you might be surprised. Everything that's going on now, they told me about this one in the 1960s. My grandmother would tell me, she says, you better pay attention to Reconquista. Well, that's exactly what's going on. And all the Mexican politicians, all of the Mexican poets, the songwriters, all the presidents, the people that are here, the ambassadors that talk about Reconquista. This is our land. This belongs to Mexico. We're taking it back. And now they've taken Los Angeles and Southern Cal, and they said this is our territory. And you're the transgressors here. And that's their disposition. So they were all about that. But some of them in the family were so much focused on that, it made them a little bit sour, in my opinion, about things. And because he didn't want to hear it all the time, that's true. So my thought is to remedy that, I try to focus upon the good things, and that is what we talk about today in the sermon, and that's Psalms 46, that God is a refuge and strength, and we need to rely upon the good things and have a lot of positive besides the negatives. So it's not just, so if you watch the news all day long, it's so some people have to turn it off because, what's happening here? And I understand that. I do think if we have a steady diet, Dan, I'm thinking, of those things, it does make us sour. I think you're right. I think it does. So that's one thing we need to be careful about that. I agree with that. Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. Okay. I was trying to think. Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah. No, well. So, and I see. No, I say, you know what? Sometimes you have to confront things, and I understand that. Well, we all have those kind of stories in our family backgrounds. Let me make mention of this also. Dan mentioned sometimes we have not been good stewards. You know what the best stewardship of the land is? Private property. Private property. When people own, think about private property for a moment. When people own property, just as the fields around here, and the farmers are there, they are well kept. They keep them well. They keep the fences well. Because the cows are. If the land is publicly owned, then what happens? Well, it's no one's responsibility. So you have the wildfires in California, which happen mostly because they refuse to take out the underbrush. They have these philosophies they believe. They don't go in there and take care of them. And boy, when that fire goes, it goes like a tinderbox. But that's just one illustration, not to say everything is that way. I know they're having a big environmental hazard in Washington, D.C. now, but that, of course, comes from the public projects that's going on there. Scorched, yeah, right. Well, you're right, and sometimes we have been poor stewards. That's correct. Yeah, sure. I think that's true. I think we need to be careful, and but the passage in Genesis 1 tells you to be caretakers of that which God has given you. We're to care for it. That's the very point. You have dominion over it, and it even uses the word manage. You manage it instead of just like pouring things out. Is it time for me to quit? I know. Okay, I want you to count. All right, so let's talk about the sources and benefits of wisdom. Let's just jump into it for a moment here. So let's talk about, first of all, the access to wisdom, and that is what access points do we have? And he tells us, number one, you have access to wisdom through nature. So let's think about nature for a moment. He begins with the passage in Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament declares his handiwork. I think when people are able to stop what they're doing in the busyness of lives and contemplate the extreme beauty of the nature and the universe, it is something that speaks God. And the idea that it would just burst into existence haphazardly, it just seems to me beyond belief. But that's, of course, what people say. So this week, Jessica asked me to come, and I'm thankful for the opportunity, come to her classroom. It's an 8th grade class at school, and talk about the universe, and talk about sun, moon, and stars, and the Big Bang Theory. And I pointed out the Big Bang Theory, just all of those theories have arisen only because those who originated the theories first rejected God and rejected the Bible. Charles Darwin, for example, the father of evolution, had great crisis of faith much before he ever went to the Galapagos Islands. And he was positing already ideas regarding evolutionary descent of man, but much before he went into the field. He already rejected God because he had some death in his family, and he just blamed it on God, and so he was rejecting God. Now, the point is that it was not a scientific conclusion. It was not, okay, I'm going to look at all the evidence and just weigh it and see what we have here. He'd already rejected God, so now he comes up with the origin of the species, and then later the descent of man, which is horrifically put out the idea that, of course, we come from lower forms of life and so forth. The same thing with T.H. Huxley, the same thing with Charles Lyell, the father of modern geology. All of them rejected the Bible much before they ever floated the theories of evolution. So what options do you have? We either were made by an eternal mind or matter is eternal. One of the two. One of the two. That's all you have. There are no other options. Kids were asking, well, what other options are there? There is no other option. Either there's an eternal mind or eternal matter. So in the days of Albert Einstein, I'll finish with this story. We'll not have time to get into it too much here. In the days of Einstein, he was able to see, and they believed in what was called the steady state theory. What's the steady state theory? Always existed, matter has always existed, and there is no beginning point to matter, and the workings of the universe has always been. It's just always been that way. But he saw through the telescope what we call the expanding universe. And he said, here's what he said. And I got this quote from Robert Jastrow, who is the world-class astronomer, in a book called God and the Astronomers. And he made the statement, he said, Einstein said at that point, he said, it leaves me cold. Why? And he pointed out, he said, that's not a statement of a scientist. That's a statement of a philosopher. Why does it leave him cold? Because it implied that there was a beginning somewhere. And he would, of course, say it would have to be the Big Bang. But he said his whole theory, his whole worldview was collapsing right before his eyes. He said, it leaves me cold. Because it also implied that if there was a beginning, possibility that there was an eternal mind that began everything. He said, those are not scientific statements. And he goes on through all of the scientists at that time. They were just continually making those kind of comments. Not scientific at all. The point simply is that once you've rejected God, the eternal mind, you have eternal matter, one form or the other. So the kids were asking about that. I said, so the Big Bang and evolution is a philosophy. It is not scientific. It is a philosophy, first and foremost. But people opt that way, and we're told a bag of goods when we go to colleges, universities, high schools, and even junior highs at this point. So what Solomon says here is you can learn about God observing the universe. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament declares his handiwork. And I think when people reflect upon it soberly and prayerfully, they cannot come but to the same conclusion. All right, thoughts. As we finish, we didn't get far, did we? That's all right. All right, next week we'll jump into sources and benefits of wisdom, access to wisdom, and then wisdom in God's book. Access to wisdom, there's a lot of places that we can learn to be wise, and he tells us about them. So we'll look at that next week.